Joining us now to break down the possible nominees is Will Chamberlain, a lawyer, editor-in-chief of Human Events, and senior counsel of the Internet Accountability Project. So, Will, I just want to get this off really quickly just to say this. Are you of the belief that Senate Republicans should try to confirm before the election?
Absolutely. There's no real reason to wait here. I mean, the Democrats in our shoes would certainly do the exact same thing. That's what it means when you have both the presidency and a majority in the Senate. Like that, the presidency is a 4-year term, not a 3-year term.
And what you're saying right now is actually the difference when people look back at the 2016 situation, because, of course, President Barack Obama made the nomination, but it was the Republican-controlled Senate then who said that they didn't want to take up that vote. Now it's a different situation. There's a Republican president and President Trump and a Republican-controlled Senate. But there are still going to be obstacles, mainly more politically, I would say, than legally. I mean, we know that the Senate Republicans could push through a nominee right now, but a lot of people right now are talking about the political ramifications. Is there a candidate that you think would have an easier confirmation process?
I think all of them are in for a similarly rough process. I think from the perspective of the Republicans, someone like someone without much of a record is probably an easier confirmation, just because a record means a huge amount of documents, as we saw during the Kavanaugh confirmation. But I think all the candidates are just going to be thrown into this kind of partisan grinder, and so I think it's just a matter of the McConnell being able to hold his caucus together.
And I know that you've been talking about this pretty extensively, and I urge all of our viewers to follow you on social media because you're always on top of these situations. I was watching your Periscope last night, and I think when you talk about an easier confirmation process, as of right now, it looks like Judge Barbara Lagoa would be that route. She's been on the court, for example, but she hasn't had many appearances where she, for example, has written law review articles, such as an Amy Coney Barrett or something like that. She hasn't really had an opportunity to voice much opinion. So can you speak a little bit about that and why you think that could be advantageous for her?
Sure. So Judge Lagoa has been on the bench for almost 13 years and has a lot of published opinions, but she's never been in a position like Judge Barrett, where she's been a law professor and thus expected to opine on big constitutional issues in public forums. And Judge Barrett, on the other hand, was a law professor at Notre Dame for a very long period of time. And so there's a large record to kind of that Democrats can point to, especially when it comes to things like her opinion on stare decisis and how precedent interacts with originalism. Judge Barrett's written on all that stuff, and so that could be used against her, whereas Judge Lagoa has issued a number of decisions, but most of them have been on discrete issues, as it happens for judges. And so she's less likely to have made these public claims about big constitutional issues. So in that respect, there would be less for a Democrat to point to and say, aha, she will overturn Roe v. Wade, or aha, she will do this thing as a Supreme Court justice that we think is unacceptable.
And as is the case with these two women, they're both Roman Catholic, but it's Judge Barrett who oftentimes gets scrutinized for some of her prior decisions. A lot of her critics say that her writing suggests that she could overturn Roe v. Wade at some point. But then there was yesterday different clips circulating around. For example, Barrett saying that she would stick to precedent, she would stick to the Supreme Court ruling on Roe v. Wade. Barbara Lagoa has similar statements as well, but I thought that you pointed out something that was interesting about those statements within themselves and what it could say about their prior decisions when it comes to Roe v. Wade or other abortion type of rights issues. Can you break down why you think that perhaps those statements may not be as binding as many people think?
Yeah, so there's a lot of excerpts going out about the questionnaires that both Judge Lagoa and Judge Barrett sent in to the Senate Judiciary Committee, where they were given questions about, do they think that Roe v. Wade is settled law? Would they adhere to precedent? And both of them said basically the same thing. Yes, Roe v. Wade is settled law, as is all Supreme Court precedent. And yes, as a lower court judge, I am bound to faithfully apply it. That doesn't really answer the question of what they would do if they were on the Supreme Court, whether they think it was wrongfully decided, whether in the position to review it from the perspective of the Supreme Court that they would take a different decision. But a lot of people were sharing those excerpts about Judge Lagoa to say, oh, this person is just untakeable, this is disqualifying, when they just don't understand both the nature of the response and the context it's given in. You don't want appellate court judges generally saying that they're going to disregard what the Supreme Court says. That's a bad sign. That's not, our court system is hierarchical in that respect. They should be obeying the Supreme Court.
Right. I mean, it's a much different type of situation when you are on a lower court than when you're someone on the Supreme Court, setting the precedent for those lower courts to eventually follow. And I think that's something that a lot of people aren't necessarily taking into account when they're looking at the prior confirmation battles involving these two. But in either event, no matter who gets to the court, it looks like it'll make it a 6-3 conservative majority, with oftentimes Brett Kavanaugh now being the swing vote on a lot of issues, maybe Neil Gorsuch, depending on whatever issue it may be. But we talk about abortion. That is something that a lot of the critics say could maybe be in threat if one of these women were to take the Supreme Court. But what would this speak about more generally, about the conservative agenda with a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court?
Well, I think of it now as kind of a 5-4 majority as long as Trump is going to be there, because I don't think Judge Roberts is in any way a reliable conservative as long as President Trump is in office. I think that that's essentially the way Roberts conceives himself. So in a sense, it's a way to return back to having a conservative majority on the court if we get this nominee confirmed. And what that will mean, well, probably, fewer decisions like Bostock, fewer decisions like the Obamacare decision. We might actually have a truly conservative Supreme Court as opposed to one that just pretends to be. And I think that would be generally good for the conservative movement. I mean, a case like Bostock is just unbelievable. That's the one about essentially extending the protections of the Civil Rights Act to gender identity and transgender individuals. That was a very, very aggressive case. And that was from Gorsuch of all people. So less of that, I think, would be very good.
Right, and that's what I was talking about. When it's depending on the issue, it could be Gorsuch, for example, that is a swing vote. It could be Kavanaugh, depending on the issue. But John Roberts, a lot of people are already saying that he's gone to the left on several of the issues as of recently. Started with Obamacare, I think, when people really started scrutinizing it. But to your point, I think a lot of conservatives don't see this as taking an overwhelming majority, but rather just a conservative majority as they thought that they once did have with John Roberts on the court. But Will Chamberlain, I really appreciate you coming on the program, breaking down these two candidates and what looks ahead of the Supreme Court. Thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to have you here.